Now, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has delivered a major speech on the alliance's plan to increase its defence spending. Mr Rutte argued that member states would need to spend significantly more to maintain NATO's deterrent strength. The Kremlin has described the move as an instrument of aggression. Meanwhile, President Trump has long criticised NATO allies for relying too heavily on Washington and has been pushing for increased defence spending from European partners. Well, this is what Mark Rutte said while outlining the current priorities for the alliance.
At the summit in The Hague, I expect allied leaders will agree to spend 5% of GDP on defence. It will be a NATO-wide commitment and a defining moment for the alliance. There are two parts to this new defence spending plan. 3.5% will be invested in our core military requirements, while the rest will go towards defence and security-related investments, including infrastructure and building industrial capacity. Our decisions on defence spending are driven by NATO's battle plans and capability targets. They define what forces and capabilities allies need to provide. And last week, NATO defence ministers agreed ambitious new targets. The exact details are classified, but we need a 400% increase in air and missile defence. We see in Ukraine how Russia delivers terror from above. So we will strengthen the shield that protects our skies. Our militaries also need thousands more armoured vehicles and tanks, millions more artillery shells. And we must double our enabling capabilities, such as logistics, supply, transportation and medical support.
Well, that was Mark Rutte. Let's speak now to our correspondent Rich Preston, who was listening to that speech at Chatham House. And Rich, that was fascinating how open Mark Rutte was, but he made that statement that European partners had to get to 5% of spending in terms of GDP. Did he give any sort of timeline on when that's actually achievable?
No, Matthew, he didn't, and he was pushed on that by our own defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale. Now, this is a wish list for Mark Rutte at the moment. The real decision will be made in 2 weeks' time when NATO leaders meet at their summit in The Hague, and that's when Mark Rutte is hoping that they will come to a firm agreement, not just on the 5%, but on the timeline. Now, he also said there was a bit of flexibility in that timeline. And one of the reasons that he said that is because, as you heard in his speech there, whilst 5% is the hard figure, it's kind of broken down. 3.5% into core defence spending, the usual bombs, bullets, tanks, submarines, etc., but 1.5% into defensive infrastructure. Now that means things like roads and rail and factories. And he pointed to Ukraine and used that as an example of a country that has recently had to move people and resources and munitions around very quickly in response to a threat. Now, some countries which are already NATO members, such as Finland and Sweden and Estonia, will look on this with a big smile on their face because collective security is a big part of their defence strategy already. Estonia already pledging to spend more than 5% of GDP on defence. So those countries looking at other European nations and NATO allies saying, well, we're glad you're going to finally be doing it the way that we've been doing it for some time. And Mark Rutte saying that this is really the important part of what NATO needs to be for the future. It needs to be stronger, fairer and more lethal because Russia is a threat to us and in the next 3 to 5 years could launch an attack on a NATO country.
Yes, Rich, he pointed to the threat obviously from Russia, but also spoke about the threat from China. Now, Ukraine has, from the last NATO summit gathering, was put on an irreversible path to joining NATO. The Secretary-General was asked about the summit that we have in 2 weeks' time. What was his answer on that?
Well, it's a difficult one because NATO, of course, is a military alliance. It's not a political group. And as you mentioned in your introduction, Russia calls NATO the aggressor. It says NATO is the provocation. Now, many NATO members want Ukraine to be in the alliance, but there are some outliers in there, including the likes of Hungary and its leader Viktor Orban. This is something that's been chewed over for many years and frankly will continue to be chewed over for many years. Mark Rutte said that what gives the alliance its strength is the way it works things out democratically in the face of this Russian aggression. And as you mentioned earlier as well, not just Russia, China, Iran and North Korea, a group that he described as the awful foursome.
Rich, thanks very much. And of course, in terms of Ukraine joining NATO, the view from the White House also absolutely critical. More on that here in the next little while around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News.